Early next year, AMD will be releasing Ryzen V-Cache. You take Zen 3, you bolt on a whole crap ton of cache, and well, you have a set of processors which is going to be a major uptick in performance. But as always, the question is, what follows next? Well, we're going to be discussing it in this very video from the perspective of both Intel and AMD, because while the two are in fierce competition with one another, of course, they do have other competitors, not least of which is both Apple as well as ARM, and we're going to be discussing that in this very video, right after this message from our sponsor. If you're running a copy of Windows 10 which isn't activated, of course, not only do you have to worry about the missing customization options, but there's also that annoying Windows desktop watermark reminding you to activate. Today's video is sponsored by whokeys.com, and they have an excellent price on Windows 10 Professional as well as Home keys. Yeah, and they also of course sell games. I've bought a few Windows 10 keys with my own personal account to test everything was legit and worked in preparation for this sponsored video. You can pick up one of their keys for 25% off using the coupon code RGT in the checkout. There's links to their website in the video description. Also, if you're building a few systems, there's bundles available too. Again, you can check out whokeys.com and use the coupon code RGT for 25% off the listed Windows 10 key prices. The next generation of processors do start to get pretty wild, and as I mentioned at the opening of this video, we can already get kind of a preview of perhaps what's to come with Ryzen V-Cache. As I mentioned a moment ago, you basically take Zen 3 and then you bolt on a ton of cache to the processor, and it's a significant performance uptick. AMD have already released some performance previews and the results are pretty stellar. Despite the fact it is quite literally Zen 3, we are looking at a performance increase which is on par with what you would expect with a next iteration, a next generation of processor. But the bigger question is, what is going to follow? For the AMD side of things, Zen 4 of course will follow after Ryzen V-Cache, and I've already spoken about performance targets and several other characteristics of Zen 4 before, but one thing I am almost certain of at this point is we're looking at a massive performance uptick. Talking about 1T performance results, I'm hearing 25 to 40%, which again is absolutely a huge increase over the previous generation of processors. Now it is worth noting that this performance of 25 to 40% is going to be a factor of not just IPC of course, but also clock frequency gains too. But even so, that is a tremendous increase in performance. It's actually phenomenal. From what I can gather, Zen 4 will probably be edging out Intel's Raptor Lake in just about every application. Despite Raptor Lake having its own subtle IPC gains, it's basically an evolution of Alder Lake, as most folks know by now. Basically, you'll get small IPC gains and decent clock frequency bumps across the board. I'm hearing total performance gains around 7 to 12% depending on the application, although I do believe, as I said, this is clock speed included. From what I'm gathering from a couple of sources, even in creative applications and games, well, Intel's Raptor Lake will probably lose ground or outright lose to AMD's Zen 4 CPUs. So yeah, no more hiding in performance benchmarks with something like Adobe Premiere, unfortunately for Intel. From what I can gather too, Zen 4 is probably not going to be solidly competed against until we see products from Intel such as Meteor or Arrow Lake, depending on the form factor. I've asked more folks regarding the core count question on Zen 4, as I put out a previous video to say that I have been hearing that they may raise for the desktop. One good source told me that, well, very little. The moment I asked them about increasing the core count for Zen 4, they actually immediately clammed up, which is usually a little bit suspect. Although another source had told me that they'd heard it's more a thing for Zen 5. I'll get more into that in a moment. As I said in my last video concerning Zen 4 raised core counts, the person who told me this information had been pretty confident, and they had been right on a number of other things previously. A previous source had also told me that AMD were increasing the core count, but then they went back on this information and told me it was no longer the case, particularly in the light of several leaks, including from Gigabyte. Personally, I'm unconvinced either way. AMD apparently have at the very least simmed out a 24 or 32 AM5 core, and this could just be the start of the rumour. They were like, what would happen if we do this, but had no real plans to release it. But again, I am told that there is an engineering sample which does exist. Personally, I'd love the rumour to be true, simply because of the WTF factor, but I'm on the fence. Particularly if AMD will ever release the product. The cost of the chip would be, well, it would be a thing, wouldn't it? Particularly for a mainstream platform, and I'm unsure of the appeal, at least right for now. When you think as well of the manufacturing issues that have been plaguing the industry, using even more dies for a mainstream platform, then again, there is the positive PR aspect of this. Now, whether AMD can release these products, whether it's technically possible for them to do it on AM5 using Zen 4, I honestly don't know. It'll be interesting though, because we have seen mobile core counts are going to be almost certainly doubling with Zen 4, and AMD are being ultra aggressive on all fronts, so I'm being told. Again, it's not the most unlikely of rumours, but I will only believe it when I see it. But anyway, continuing forward, I'm also told that a Vcache version of Zen 4 exists. I think most of us expect this, and yes, it is planned for a desktop release. But this is where things start to get really weird. Zen 5 is of course officially confirmed, but I am hearing that there is significant departures for Zen 4 for a number of reasons. The first is pesky IPC gains are back to bite Intel in the butt. Again, I'm hearing IPC targets are about 25% for Zen 5 over Zen 4, so if you own say a 5900X and you jump to Zen 5, you're going to be in for a good old time. For those curious, Intel's Lunar Lake should be about a 20% gain in performance, though apparently AI is a huge leap, quote, from previous generations. Now, there have been numerous rumours swirling from the likes of Grayman and Copati7 for a while that Zen 5 does indeed have big.LITTLE architectures, heterogeneous if you prefer. Basically, high-performance cores go brr if you're running a demanding game, and smaller cores go brr if you're editing, say, a Word document or something similar. From my understanding, this is true, and my source also claims that there are indeed small cores, energy-efficient cores, based on Zen 4. That's right, the energy-efficient cores are Zen 4C, apparently. We've also seen recent patches which hint this too. I've actually covered them recently in a video. This further solidifies AMD's direction for Zen 5, but what's perhaps even more interesting is the direction AMD are going with accelerator chips. Oh, and for those wondering what the heck the difference is between Zen 4C, that is going to be the little or energy efficient or whatever the heck you want to call it cores in the upcoming processors versus Zen 4, the actual, big cores, well, I'm hearing a few things. The first is that L2 cache is apparently doubled per core compared to vanilla Zen 4. But also Zen 4C significantly cuts L3 cache. I've actually been given two figures by a couple of different people. The first person told me that they'd been hearing both a half size and a quarter size, and the second person had told me it was a quarter size. So I don't know, so I'm going to put both figures out there. They could be for different products, for example, mobile or whatever. Either way, yeah, that's what I've been hearing. When you think about it logically, it does make sense. We can presume that those cores are largely going to be dealing with lightly threaded applications. And so, cutting L3 and increasing L2 does make sense for numerous reasons, but again, we don't know the full architecture. I've also heard rumors that Zen 4C cores do not have SMT, but frankly, I don't know if this is true. It's more been a rumor rather than something someone's told me. From the perspective of applications running very lightly threaded, this does make sense. And again, it does kind of match what Intel have done with, say, Alder Lake. But I don't know if it's just this is similar logic, therefore it's probably true, or whether it is true and that's what I've been told. So I'm going to put that as a not very confident, but I'm going to mention it anyway. Accelerator chips, though, getting back to those, aren't anything new per se. Really, mobile phones have had regions of silicon or even specific chips which handle acceleration for a number of things, including stuff like improving image quality of photos, handling voice recognition, and so on and so on. Either way, AMD have mentioned already accelerator chips are coming to their processors in the future, and this silicon would be extremely important to a number of tasks. Robert Halleck from AMD did mention these, but he was pretty cagey on exactly what these accelerators could do, and obviously this makes sense. I did some digging, spurred on by Robert's public disclosure. And I did remember that a Microsoft Direct Storage demo had a public speaker, and during his presentation of their plans for Direct Storage for PC, he mentioned that at the moment this would be handled by the GPU's shaders, CUDA cores if you prefer NVIDIA speak, but this may change in the future. To be clear, this is not verbatim wording, but essentially the spirit of things. He did say that he couldn't really talk about things that their partners were planning for the future though. For those unfamiliar, direct storage for consoles basically use hardware decompression inside the Xbox Series S or X's SoC. Sony do much the same for the PlayStation 5, albeit using their own APIs, custom silicon tweaks and so on and so on. Basically, this saves CPU cores from handling data decompression and movement. This is really costly on CPU time and frees those cores up for doing other stuff. Game consoles would do game logic stuff, for example. Direct storage does other things though, like being its own storage API, allowing you to more efficiently batch up I/O requests, reducing overhead, latency. You know what, I've already done a video on this speaking about direct storage, so you can watch one of those if you so desire. But getting back to the point here, on the PC, direct storage is a little different, as it's being handled again by the CUDA cores or streaming processors of the GPU. So this means that data which is being destined for system RAM for the CPU to process, say audio or whatever, it gets copied over as normal, and the CPU needs to handle the decompression and decide what to do with all of that data. Data for the GPU, let's make things really simple here and say a texture, meanwhile gets directly sent to the GPU, basically bypassing the CPU and system memory as much as it can, because the GPU again will be decompressing this. That's great, but it does have a few drawbacks. The first is it doesn't help a diddly darn crap if the data is going to the CPU, as the CPU still needs to decompress it. The second issue is it does require a bit of GPU power, theoretically, though what the overheads are we don't know yet. The third issue is that you're not able to compress CPU data as much as you perhaps would like to, because the more you compress it, the harder the CPU needs to work. Now, for those of you laughing with your 12900K or 5950X running an RTX 3080 Ti or whatever, this may not sound as bad, but first of all, you are still using system resources for this, and the second point is that for those who are gaming on mobile solutions, or if you're running, say, a data center, this can start to hammer the system quite heavily. In fact, data centers really will feel this. Those ultra-powerful Genoa server CPUs might have 96 or 128 cores or whatever AMD decide to go up with in the future, but ultimately you're dealing with huge amounts of data that these things are processing. And in laptop gaming, for example, you might have 8 or 12 or whatever CPU cores, but again, you're pounding them constantly to decompress or move data around, and I just want to stress this is not energy efficient as well. So yeah, I am told that we will indeed have accelerators to move and decompress data. Allegedly, we might also see these accelerators of some description debut with AMD's Rembrandt, although I don't know how these accelerators, assuming this information is at all accurate, differ compared to the desktop implementation, let alone the server side of things. I'm also told that these accelerators and Zen 5 take more than a leaf or two out of Apple's processor designs too. And it bears repeating, Intel and AMD both need to work towards efficiency, not just higher levels of performance. So there you have it, guys. Processors are going to become very interesting in the next couple of years. I think that Zen 3 for me has been a very curious release for AMD, because obviously they bumped the prices up and so on, and it was pretty obvious that at the time of the launch anyway, Intel really weren't able to offer any competition. Alder Lake has done a pretty good job though, and it's to me going to be very curious how both companies are marketing their respective CPUs as we go forward. Especially when we start to look at other markets. While I'm personally most interested in the desktop market, as most viewers know, laptops and servers are obviously extremely lucrative. And I've mentioned a couple of times at this point that Intel are planning to try anyway to lock NVIDIA out of the GPU market as much as possible for laptops. And I suspect both AMD and Intel are going to be as aggressive as they can, offering, you know, all-encompassing solutions from their respective products. I suspect that the next couple of years are going to be very curious, especially when it comes to things like APUs. You can start to, in your mind, imagine a world where lower-end discrete GPUs are going to pretty much go the way of the dodo. You know, with AMD and Intel, again, offering highly competitive solutions, which will, for the most part anyway, render cards, I mean, just, for example, you know, like the 1650s or something like that in the world, just pretty much meaningless. Outside of that, though, for high-performance computing, I'm particularly interested to see how accelerators are really used, as there is a crap ton of different usage scenarios, particularly when we start to look at things outside of just gaming, but, you know, mobile data centers and so on and so on. It's going to be a really exciting time, I suspect, and hopefully you'll join me in following it. With that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. If you did, then the normal stuff, like, share, comment and subscribe, because it is YouTube after all, and I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.